Hey, everybody, glad you could join us back today. We are continuing our study of parenting through the Proverbs. Today, I got to sit down with a good friend of mine and discuss just that friendship and the importance of pouring it into our children at a young age, whether your children are still in grade school or we want to say junior high, high school, even as an adult child, still ways we can model friendship in front of them. And so I pray that you'll enjoy. All right, Bryan, thanks for getting on here. Everybody, this is my friend Bryan Kelley. I'm going to let him introduce himself and tell you who he is, where he's from. And so go ahead, Bryan.
Hello, everyone. As Don said, my name is Bryan Kelley. I am originally from Cumming, Georgia. Had the distinct pleasure of meeting Don while we were in Mississippi together. We got to share some life together at work, but ended up becoming friends out of all of it. I am currently back in Georgia working at Chick-fil-A's Corporate Support Center. I'm working in IT right now and just having the time of my life.
Oh, that's good. Well, Bryan, and as we talked before and everybody was watching, I wanted to talk with Bryan about the importance of building strong friendships and how from an early age that should be instilled in us, in our kids. And Bryan doesn't have kids yet, but he will. I know the Lord's faithful. And but I couldn't think of a better person to talk to about this, because getting to know Bryan over the years, he has friends that he has kept and stayed in contact with way better than me. As far as he's good about keeping in contact with these folks, he's really good. And so Bryan, what would you say is a key of building strong friendships that that you see as important from a young age, whether it be as a child or teenager? What's something you see as important in keeping and building those friendships?
I think that I would almost say it's twofold. The first of which is you have to be a good listener, which sounds a little silly at first, but in order to be a friend with somebody, you have to come to know them. And in order to know somebody, you have to be willing to meet them where they're at. And to do that, you have to listen to them and you have to hear where their story has led them in life. You have to hear what they're going through at the moment. You have to meet them where they're at. So I think you really have to know how to put yourself aside and listen to another human who's before you, who has history. So it sounds silly from a perspective of a child or from a like teenage perspective, but I think that if you really like get yourself in the place of listening to somebody else and just listening and setting yourself aside instead of feeling like you need to interject your experiences, I think that that can be really meaningful for people, and you're going to find out a lot more when you listen than when you talk. The other thing I would say is being intentional. We live in a world where we are super distracted all the time. We have phones, we have computers, we have game consoles, and something's always competing for our attention. But something that I really strive to do is try to think of a person, whoever comes to mind at any given time or day, and take a moment to reach out with them and just tell them, hey, I'm thinking about you. How are you doing? And it's that simple moment. It takes literally maybe a minute or two to shoot off a text, or, if you have an hour or so, you can give a phone call. But that attempt at intentionality forges a connection. And that's something that I've been really blessed to say that I've been able to do over the years, is just try to be intentional with the people that I really care about so that we can stay connected and we can share life with one another, regardless of the distance or the boundary that we have.
That's good, and that's so true. Kind of going back to that first part of that you said, and just to speak, just to like testify, like that's the truth. And as I've gotten older, I can think back being a teenager and especially, or even in college, when you're in a conversation with a friend. Well, they've got this story, and well, I've got to come up with a better one. Or it's just that kind of that one up mentality. And it wasn't until I was probably in my late 20s that I had a pastor. We were sitting around, several of us sitting around talking, and that's what we were just comparing stories. And I just remember him saying, "Yep, first guy always loses." And I'm sitting there thinking, man, there's truth to that. I said, so then that right there, that caused me to pay attention. Now, granted, I'll give into it a lot. Like we'll sit around and do it, and I'll find myself caught up in it again. But I try to keep that in mind, because it is so true, just about and being a listener, being there to hear it, and that I know it's if for my kids, trying to do that for my kids, because even like James Walter being 6, he's got tons of words he wants to say. He's got stuff he wants to tell. I mean, when I got home a while ago, they met me in the driveway and they were so excited because they had cleaned their room, because that's like a big deal.
That is a big
Jonas
deal.
cleaned out. Oh, it's so and I'm like, and they were like, "We cleaned our room." I'm like, "Well, awesome, great." And so and they were telling me all the stuff they did. So just being able to listen, that's absolutely and man, to second the second part of that, of being intentional, and again, I attribute it to age, even though that's really, that can be a catch-all excuse, but just the relationships we have with people, the older you get, the whether distance is between you or health or things like that, become obstacles for us. So I mean, absolutely, because there's people that I can think of that I grew up with, that I'm connected to on with social media or things like that, and because of the ease of that, but it's always great if I'm back in Mississippi and see somebody, and sit there and get to visit. I mean, for instance, back in October, my family, we went to Texas A&M to watch Mississippi State play, and we won. So,
Nice.
but and Andrew's all about sports, and the quarterback from Mississippi State, his uncle and I grew up together. I mean, from kindergarten through graduation, we
Cool.
played basketball, baseball, football, all that stuff together. And we're sitting there at the game, and here they see this guy get up and catch him out of the corner. I look over, and it's my buddy from like that I grew up with, and I just stand up and yell at him, and he yells back at me. And so, and we get to catch up after the game for a little bit. But just that's a friendship. We may not see each other every day, but when we do, it's not like we're going out of the way to ignore each other. We'll sit and we talked, because he was talking to me because he hadn't seen or talked to me since my dad passed, and he wanted to talk to me, and we got to talk about his family. And so those things, time may be separated, but it's neat to see how it can be brought back together, how the Lord does that.
Mm-hmm.
So as with those two, what would you say as far as kind of going up the spectrum here, getting to you into college, young career? How have you seen doing those two things, being intentional, being a list? How have you seen obstacles come up for you? I mean,
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that I mentioned distractions first. I think that we are so oriented at consuming just information at any given time, right? So like, I think that even as a young person, I mean, like social media today is, I would wager say, even more captivating than it ever has been. You have platforms like TikTok, for example, where they've developed such an intelligent algorithm that it knows the content that you like to ingest. And because it knows that, it pushes it to
puts it in
you.
front
So
of
it's
you. Yes.
exactly, it's so much easier to get caught up in that. So I would say the distractions. I think that in American culture specifically, like there's so much individuality and pride wrapped into American culture that there's so many facets of friendship, and I think another thing to think about is just being willing to be open yourself. Something that, and you really have to be willing to open yourself up and share yourself too. And I think that like that's something that a lot of people really struggle with, is that we've been told from an early age that like you keep your life to yourself, you keep your head down, you do your thing, you consume, you know, you do what your time with you do with your time what you please.
Mhm.
But I think that the problem is that a lot of people just aren't willing to open themselves up to another human as well, that they,
Yeah.
you know, they don't know, especially as people get older or even younger people. Like high school can be a terrible experience for people,
Yeah.
just because there's so much social pressure of like you're supposed to be this certain like societally normative person according to what your peers say at high school. So I think being willing to be authentic, being willing to open yourself up. Um, so for me, some of the obstacles has been encountering people who are at that place where they haven't had a person who's interested in them and who shows intentionality or who listens. And for some people, that can actually be pretty unnerving because they're just used to shooting the breeze, right? They're just
Yeah.
used to talking
Yeah.
about football or weather, or, you know, the kids are going to the soccer game, or, you know, I'm going to these games, you know, in high school, or doing these things in my extracurriculars. So I think that that's been challenging more so actually the last couple of years since I've been back in Georgia. I found that I'm encountering more people specifically in a larger work environment where, you know, they're really, really, they have significant walls up. And I think that as believers, that's kind of where we really need to begin to be thoughtful and prayerful about the people that we're engaging, because what we should hear is that those people have a history and they have a past, and there's probably a reason behind why they're not opening up. It's not because they don't like you. It's not because you've done something wrong, but there's something in their past that's preventing them from opening up. And so I think that that's been a really large obstacle, is kind of learning that not everybody wants to be
No, that's
engaged.
right. No, that's
Not
right.
everybody wants to be your friend. And like, you got to love them through that regardless, because they're in your life.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And see, I think, um, I, I think, and I see my side of it because, you know, there's about 10 years between you and me. And
Mhm.
so whether you say whether we're in the same generation, just kind of at either ends, I'm fine with that. But I see from like as somebody who's in their early 40s, people my age and just a hair older that have students in my youth group, or their parents of students in other places, is that we were a generation that, like you said a while ago, that individualism and pride, like that was really pushed on us. Like, you're a leader, which the truth is not everybody is a leader.
No.
um you know, you're a leader, you're number one, you're the best, all this stuff that's really, 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 really pushed. And so now we have that generation as parents. And so they they were, and I say this all the time, that especially dads my age weren't taught to open up, you know,
Yeah.
weren't taught to be vulnerable
Yeah.
with their feelings, you know,
Yeah.
not, you know, they're coming out of, you know, Generation X and boomers hating men, you know, men are supposed to be tough and all this kind of stuff. And then you get to millennial generation and you know, and Generation Z, where that shift has happened, to where it's, hey, you know, it's
Yeah.
okay to talk about what's going on, what are your struggles. And as the church, I think we failed in supporting that, when that's in scripture,
Right.
of that we are to be there,
Right.
for what, because, and we've just let our personal preferences dictate how we're going to live the Christian life, instead of letting
Mhm.
scripture dictate what we're doing. so
Mhm.
so I think that, I know, and I think you're dead on with those obstacles. And I just know, and I've gotten to where I hate chalking things up to a generational thing. I just think it's an excuse, but at the same time, I think there's slivers of truth in it, because I see it.
Mhm.
um and I can, and I've just tried to be as honest as I can about where my faults are, in whether it was how I was poured into, or because I shared with our students last night, I was in my mid to late 20s before anybody ever discipled me, like said,
Mhm.
hey, come, I want to pour into you, are you willing to walk with me through this? And I'm like, what is this about? Now, there were people that discipled me, but it wasn't necessarily a purposeful, active discipleship.
Right.
You know, I'm at church on Sundays and Wednesdays. I'm around my youth pastor. I'm around other godly people throughout my week, and I see it modeled for me. But it's not necessarily high accountability
Right.
or challenge. And I, as much as I'd say, well, I want to, that's their fault. It's just as much mine, and I know that. But I challenged our kids last night. Find somebody that will pour into you. Be willing to
Yeah.
be poured into.
Yeah.
Be willing to, because that's where that reservation comes in. Is sometimes we're just not willing. We don't want to have a part of it. We don't want anybody doing anything like that. And so hopefully we'll see some fruit from it. But yeah, I think that's exactly right. Because so let me ask you this. What about because I think in friendship, a lot of times we tend to stay in our circle. We get comfortable with, if you're a believer, we get comfortable with our church folks, which is good. It's good to have that community. Scripture calls for it,
Yes.
but we have the tendency to get so comfortable with it, we don't really go anywhere else.
Right.
Or we have our work friends, or if you think back in school, you had all the athletes might buddy up over here, or the debate team. Because you went to a lot bigger school than I did, so y'all probably had way more opportunities. But we just had like a couple of people. We had the people who drove trucks and the people who didn't, and and athletes. So, but what would you say about I can say I believe the Lord has allowed me to have friends across the board, in different areas of life. How have you seen that? How have you seen the Lord use that to be beneficial, be a blessing? Because you and I are kind of the same. You grew up in Georgia. You've moved around. I grew up in Mississippi. I moved around, and so through that itself, it exposes us to different environments and different people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think that, like, for me, you were right. Like, when I was younger, I look back and it was really easy to, kind of get stuck into your group. And just kind of roll with those friends and those people. I think that where I really started to, I guess you could get more accustomed to engaging other people was in college. I became very active on campus and encountered a lot of people, and just got to know them, and that's kind of where friendships started forming, that were with people that were Christians. And I have many dear brothers and sisters to this day that I keep up with from college that are believers alongside me. But then I started encountering people who don't know the Lord.
Yeah.
And those relationships, I think that they're really special, because we as believers have this really beautiful opportunity to share life with those people, and to put Christ's love on display for them. And I've been so blessed over the years. That trend has continued. And I think for me, the most important thing that I'll go back to is just listening to those people's stories and being able to speak to things that occurred in their lives, and really setting aside any kind of judgment. I mean, we see all throughout Scripture, and especially in the New Testament, with Christ and where he met people. Rarely do you see like an example of where he's encountered somebody and he just outright just starts speaking at them. There's some sort of conversation that occurs first, or line of questioning, where we see Christ, like, obviously he knows who they are, but like, it's one of those circumstances where if we engage the people where they're at, and we put our judgments and our preconceptions aside, there can be some really beautiful friendships that bloom out of that. And so as I've moved around and I've worked in different places, I've been confronted with people from all sorts of different walks of life, and they've blessed me to an enormous degree, and I would like to think that I've blessed them as well. And so an example is one of my friends from Starkville, actually. He and I have stayed in touch after I left, so that's been about 2.5 years. He now lives in Minnesota. And I flew up to go hang out with he and his fiance this past December. Neither of them are believers. But we love one another. And he gave me the honor of asking me to come alongside he and his bride to be in their wedding to support them
Awesome.
as a groomsman. And I think that that's just a testament to say that, like, the other people that are his groomsmen are family. Like, I'm the only one who isn't family that's
awesome.
in the wedding party for him. And I think it just says that, like, there are going to be facets of their lives, of these people that we encounter, that we inevitably as believers disagree with, or that make us uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And that's because we have a guiding set of principles, and we have a life to be set apart in, as Christ has commanded us to be. And that's a good thing. However, I think that the place where a lot of Christians, especially believers who are really engaged in the church and engaged in their community, which again is a wonderful thing, it's a good thing. But I think where people start to trip is when they began to take those same sets of expectations that our King has for us and place them on people who don't know him.
Right.
And that's where there's such a significant barrier for Christians to get to know people who don't know Christ, because they're placing expectations on them that shouldn't be there yet. And so, that's kind of what I've really tried to do, is set aside my preconceptions, set aside those expectations, get to know them where they're at, love them. And if they ask for my opinion on something, and if they ask what I think about something, I'll tell them, but it's not something that I'm going to shove down their throat.
Yeah.
And that has been a huge blessing. And I think that, like, I've had some really, and I have a couple of friends that I've gotten really close with that still don't know Christ, and I pray for them every day. But I would say that that's been the biggest challenge, is just making sure that we're not projecting what we think and feel as believers on those people, so that we can actually be where they're at, and we can love them where they are.
Yeah. Oh man, that's good stuff, dude. That is. I had a ton of people just like flood my mind when you were saying that, because I'm like, yes. I mean, because the Lord continues to put people in your path that need you, or that need him, excuse me. But he'll use you to either to direct them to him, or they won't. And
Right.
But at the same time, it's okay, because he's got you there for a reason, and finding contentment where you are in that relationship is, and whether it's at work or wherever it is, it's great. And so, all right, well, Bryan, I really appreciate you getting on here. Any last tidbits of wisdom that you would like to just dish out?
I would say that the last thing that I would give, I think, is that I think people often focus so much upon their partner or their family for a source of like a safe haven and a place to go. And I think that so often, because of that lack of willingness, maybe not lack of willingness, but that lack of vulnerability, we set aside the importance of friendship. And I think that if we look at the example of Christ, he was dear friends with his disciples. And there were moments that were absolutely critical for them to be there for him, and vice versa. And if we look at the example that Christ has given us, I think that we should hold those friendships, and we should ascribe even greater importance and weight to friendships in some circumstances than to our partners. Because frankly, there are some conversations that, like, you and I as brothers could have that, maybe aren't as welcome with a partner. I'm not saying that anything should be excluded, but there's this mutual understanding, I think. And so I would just say that, like, love your friends, make them feel loved. Don't hesitate to tell them that you love them. We don't say it enough, and really engage. Just with reckless abandon, engage them where they're at, because man, like people need people more than they admit. And like having for me just come out of like a season where the Lord was just really enacting a lot of change in my life, growing me, which I think that we all know that sanctification is a terribly painful process. So I was going through it. I don't think that I would have made it if it hadn't been for the people that the Lord put around me and that I was able to like lean upon. And you don't have those people if you don't really value them and keep them there. So that's my last thing, is just like love on those people with reckless abandon. It doesn't matter what people think. Like love your friends, chase them, be with them, and the people that are meant to be in your life will be.
That's right. All right. Well, I appreciate it, man.
Absolutely, dude.
I really appreciate, Bryan, you sitting down with me and discussing this. I couldn't think of a whole lot of people that would model such a biblical form of friendship as you do. And so I'm thankful to the Lord for our friendship and how he continues to use you where you are to pour into people's lives and to build relationships for the sake of Jesus. So parents, I hope that that was beneficial and you can take something from it, and the Lord will continue to use that in your life and mine.